Hey everybody, it's Monday, May 18th. Time to get started on our math video for today. We're going into Module 8, and we're actually starting way back in Lesson 13. We're going to skip Lessons 1 through 12 for the time being. We're going to start with time, and we're going to learn a little bit about time so we can be prepared for third grade. And if you'll notice the lesson target, it says tell time to the half hour or quarter hour. So if you look at problem 1, you can see 4 circles, and they don't even look like clocks because what's missing in these circles are the numbers 1 through 12 and also the 2 hands that we'll be talking about that are on a clock, the hour hand and the minute hand. We're not going to talk about the numbers. We're not going to talk about the hands quite yet. First thing we need to understand about time is that time is broken into equal parts on a clock. And we're going to look at these 4 circles here. And you can tell by looking at them that we start with the first one here. It has only one equal part shaded in. And we call that a quarter hour. And if we look at the second one, you can see that there are 2 parts that are actually shaded in. So we actually have 2 quarters, but it also represents 1/2 of the whole circle. So we could call that a half. And then we could look at the third one, and you can see that we actually have 3 of the equal parts shaded in. So those are 3 quarters. It's more than half of the whole circle. So we're calling it 1, 2, 3 quarters that are shaded. And we get to the last one, and we can see that all 4 equal parts are shaded in. Now you might say, why don't we call that the whole thing? Because we're only using the words that are in the problem. It tells us that we want to label these 4 circles as either quarter, quarters, half, or halves. So let's go down, let's go back to the first one. And we can see that there's only one of the 4 equal parts that is shaded in. So we're going to give that the label of quarter, because only 1/4 of the circle is shaded. We're going to come to the second circle, and we can see that we actually have 2 of the equal parts shaded in. Now we could say that those are quarters, but because these 2 quarters are also half of the entire circle, we're going to give this a label of half, because it's half of the time of 1 hour, as you'll see when we start looking at the numbers and the hands. So we're calling this half of this circle shaded in. The third circle has 3 of these quarters shaded in. So we can't say it's half shaded because it's more than half. So we're going to label this as the word quarters, because 3 of the quarters are shaded in. And then finally we get to the final circle, and it's all shaded. So we're going to give it the title of halves, because each side of the circle is shaded in. This is 1/2, and this is the other half. Okay, so when we talk time, we're talking about quarter hours, half hours, and again quarter hours, but we're looking at more than 1 quarter hour, and then we're looking at a whole hour that has gone by would be represented by 2 halves being shaded in. So we want to keep this in mind, and I would encourage you to also look at pages 249 and 250 in your Succeed Math book, because they will give you a little more definition of these labels. and it will help you solve the problems that you'll see in your homework. So let's go and take a look at what problem 2 is asking. Problem 2 says, write the time shown on each clock. Okay, so we're going to introduce now these 12 numbers that are around a clock and the 2 hands that are on a clock. Now, we want to remember what the numbers represent. The numbers represent the hours in a day. Now remember, a day is partially light, day is partially dark, so we have a name for the daytime hours. That's called AM. And then we have another half of a day is called PM. And they can both have equal parts of light and dark, or some percentage of light and dark in both. But the important thing here is if we're going to write the time shown on this clock, I have to remember that my 2 hands, I have an hour hand and I have a minute hand. We're not going to talk about a second hand because that would be a third hand on a clock. Right now we're only going to talk about the hour hand and the minute hand. Now this clock is showing one hand is pointing to the 12 and the other is pointing to a 6. Now it's kind of hard to distinguish which is the longer of the 2 hands, because remember, the hour hand is short and the minute hand is long. So I'm going to show you a way to tell. If you go up here and you look where this hand stops, it stops right at the 12, and this hand is pointing to the 6, but it's not really actually touching the 6, as the hand on top is almost actually touching this number 12. So I can tell by that which one's longer. So the longer hand is on the 12, and we call that the minute hand. So I can draw an arrow. That's the minute hand. The shorter hand is on the hour, pointing. It's pointing to the number 6. So we're in the 6th hour, and I'll just draw a little arrow there. That's the hour hand. So the time on this clock, when a shorter hand or the hour hand is pointing to exactly to a number, it's 6 o'clock. And the reason I know it's 6, because it's pointing to the 6 is the hour of the day. That's the short hand pointing to the hour of the day. The minute hand is directly on the 12. That means it is exactly 6 o'clock. Now, the minute hand means how many minutes past an hour. Well, when it's directly pointing to the 12, the number 12, that means that no minutes have yet passed the 6 o'clock hour. So it is exactly 6 o'clock with no minutes. And we designate that by writing 6 for the hour. These 2 dots after the 6 just indicate how many minutes after the hour. And there's no minutes past this time yet. We would only know there is time past 6 o'clock once this longer hand starts moving around the clock. So this first problem shows this time on this clock shows 6 o'clock. Now, is it AM or PM? We're not going to worry about that for now. We're not going to worry if it's AM or PM. You cannot tell on a clock just from the 2 hands whether it's AM or PM. You would have to know that through other ways, and we're not going to talk about that yet. Let's move to B. This clock in problem B. Now, I want you to notice again, one hand is longer, and you can tell because it's actually covering the 3 that's on this clock. And the shorter hand, it was pointing to the 6 directly over here, But now you see it's moved a little. And the reason it's moved a little is because we have minutes after 6. It's not exactly 6 o'clock anymore. And I know, looking at this, that this hand has moved this much distance, or it's moved from 12 to the 3. And that, if I shade that part in like this, I can tell from the clocks or the circles that are up top that that shaded part looks exactly like this shaded part. And that tells me that 1/4 of an hour that's passed, we're still in the 6 o'clock hour, so I'm still going to write 6 because the shorthand is not on the 7 yet. It's still between 6 and 7. And the number of minutes that have gone past is what we call a 1/4 hour. And a 1/4 hour is equal to 15 minutes. So I'm going to label this clock. The time it shows me is 6:15. 6, because of the shorthand, is pointing almost to the 6. And 15 is because the longer hand is on the 3. And shaded in, that tells me it's 1/4 of the hour past. 6:15. Now, let's go to clock C. Clock C, now clock C looks a little bit like clock B, except the hands have changed. I now have the longer hand is pointing to the 6, and the shorter hand is between the 3 and the 4. So if I extend this, you can see that it's still between 3 and 4. But as long as this short hand, the hour hand, is not pointing directly to the 4, we're still in the 3 o'clock hour. So I'm going to say it is 3 o'clock, and some minutes have passed by because I can tell from my long minute hand is down here. Remember, we said that this 1/4 shaded in is 1/4, but this hand has gone from 12 all the way around to 6, so it's shading in a whole second 1/4. And if you look up at the top, we said that when 2 sides on the right are shaded in, we call that a half, because half of this clock, or half of the time of this hour, has passed. So a half an hour is equal to 30 minutes. Remember, this 1/4 is 15 minutes, and this 1/4 that's shaded in is 15 minutes. So 15 plus 15 equals 30. So the time on this clock is showing 3:30, either AM or PM. We're not worried about that right now. Let's go to clock D. Okay? Now, clock D, keep in mind we're always watching to see where these long and short hands move to. And I always want to find where the short hand is pointing first, because that gives me the hour that I'm looking at. So if I look at this short hand right here, it's directly between the 9 and the 10. So we're always going to say that it's the 9 o'clock hour, because this hand has not yet reached the 10. So we're going to say it's 9 o'clock. The 2 dots are going to indicate how many minutes past 9 o'clock it is. So again, notice this big hand is pointing at 6 here, just like it was in clock C. So again, we could say that hand has moved 1/4 of the way around the clock, and it's moved the second 1/4 around the clock. And we said, remember, each 1/4 is 15 minutes. So the time that this clock is showing us is 9 9:30. The only difference between the two is this shorthand. Once it was pointing between the 3 and the 4, so we said it was 3:30, and this one is pointing between the 9 and the 10, so we're calling that 9:30, because they're both showing half the distance around the clock for the longer hand. And that is the first side. If we take a look at the second side of this, it's going to ask us to match each time to the correct clock by drawing a line. So let's remember that our circle, you know, the circle of a clock is broken into 4 parts, and I could draw it like that. And remember, each section, each equal section is a quarter hour. But let's learn how to use words that people use when they tell time. If someone says it's 3:45, let's make sure we understand which quarter they're talking about. If it's 3:45, you can see the shorter hand is almost on the 4, but not quite. It's because the big hand has already circled the first quarter, it's past the second quarter, and it's gone even beyond into the third quarter. So there's only 1 quarter left for this minute hand to travel. And we call that 3:45. It's 1 quarter left to make it to 4 o'clock. So, which one of these clocks is showing 3:45? Well, let's draw a line right here. 3:45 is this drawing here, because there's only 1 quarter left for the minute hand to travel. Okay, let's find a clock that says 8:30. Now, when we say half, we're talking about half of the clock on the right-hand side being shaded in, because that shades in half of the entire circle, or half of the entire clock. And when it's 8:30, I know that this clock is 8:30, because the second, or excuse me, the hour hand, the short hand, is past the 8, because the minute hand has already traveled half the distance of the clock. So this is 8:30, or another way to say this would be 8:30, because 30 minutes have passed the hour of 8 o'clock. This side of the clock is 30 minutes. Now, you notice it says 8:30 over here, and I already marked 8:30, so you could say 8:30 or 8:30 to describe the hands on this clock. Many people say it both ways. You could say it's 8:30 or it's 8:30. Now, let's take a look at 3:45. Now, is there a clock, is there one of these 3 clocks that has the short hand, or the hour hand, pointing at the 3, or is between the 3 and the 4? So to answer that, we have to go back up here and say, yes, this hand is pointing between the 3 and the 4. So that makes this part of 3:45 correct. Excuse me, let me go back here. I circled the 3 because that's the hour, and that means this hand is the 3 o'clock hour. But the 45, well, 45 is 15 plus 15 plus 15. Now, 15 plus 15 plus 15 equals 5, 10, 15. And I carry the 1, put the 1 in the tens place, and I end up with 45. That means 45 minutes have gone past the hour of 3 o'clock. And that's what this clock shows. Because here's the first 15 minutes that's passed. The second shaded part is the next 15 minutes that have passed. And the third part is the next 15 minutes that have passed. So this 3:45 also should point to the first clock, because it's another way of saying 3:45. We could say how much time is left before 4 o'clock by saying 1/4 before 4 o'clock, or we could say how much time is past 3 o'clock, and we could say 3:45. Just always remembering the clock is, is broken into equal quarters. 15 minutes, 15 minutes, 15 more minutes, final 15 minutes. Or you could say 30 minutes on one side, and there's 30 minutes on the other. So the last one says 1:15. Okay, there's only one clock of the 3 where the hour hand is pointing to the 1 or between the 1 and the 2. And that's this clock here. So you can see this hand is between, just past the 1, and it's not on the 2 yet. So we're saying the hour is the 1 o'clock hour, and there's 15 minutes shaded in because that's where the minute hand is pointing. So that's 15, and the hour hand is pointing to 1, so we're saying that 1:15 is this clock right here. So we always have to remember, where is the hour hand? Is it on a number exactly, or is it in between two numbers? And unless it has come to the higher of the number, what I really mean is, unless this hand right here, unless it is pointing exactly to the 2 and the minute hand is exactly on 12, you're still in the 1 o'clock hour. So that 1 o'clock hour lasts for 60 minutes. And it only moves slower. It moves much slower than the minute hand. So 1:15 is another way to say what this clock is showing. Then we get down to problem 3, and it says draw the minute hand on the clock to show the correct time. Okay, so you have 3 clocks, but notice there's only one hand drawn on each of them. So we have to draw the other hand, the minute hand. That's the longer hand. And if this clock is telling me it's 3:45, well, they're correct at pointing this short hand between the 3 and the 4, because that's the 3 o'clock hour. But I have to write the hand, or draw the hand, that says 45 minutes. So remember, I can shade in this amount. Remember how much that is. That's 15 minutes. I can shade in the second quarter. That's another 15 minutes. But I need to go all the way and do the third quarter, which is the third 15 minutes. And those 3 15 minutes equal 45. So if I'm going to draw the hand, the long hand would be pointing right close to the 9, just like that, because that indicates 3:45. That's the time that clock is showing. Now there's one more clock, oh, excuse me, 2 more clocks. This one says, let's find and draw the minute hand for 11:30. So, notice the shorthand, the hour hand, is right between the 11 and 12. So it's still the 11 o'clock hour. But 11:30 means half of this clock, the minute hand has traveled half of the clock. So the minute hand is going to point exactly to the 6. Because what that means is 30 minutes have passed the 11 o'clock hour, making it 11:30. And finally, our last clock says 6:15. Again, the shorthand is between the 6 and the 7. That's indicating it's the 6 o'clock hour. We're in the 6 o'clock hour, but we're only 15 minutes past 6 o'clock. So we know 15 minutes is just one of those 4 quarters that we could shade in. And if I was going to draw the hand of the minute hand, it would be pointing right to the number 3. So boys and girls, in your homework, you're going to see similar types of problems. But again, since we haven't studied time in the classroom yet, and you're getting a very short description of it here, make sure that you're looking at pages 249 and 250. They're there to help you and to show you how to solve the problems that you'll be assigned. Okay, so have a good time with time, and as we practice this more, you'll get a better feeling for quarter hours and half hours, and different ways that we say the same time, like a quarter to an hour, or sometimes we say 2:45, or we could say it's a quarter to 2. It's the same time, it's just said with different words. And then of course we'll study AM and PM at a later date. So I'll say goodbye for now, and we will see you again tomorrow.